So I'm going to talk briefly about democratic innovations today. So we're going to take like a 5-minute step back and zoom out conceptually and also geographically so that we understand the larger landscape, how California report card fits into the field of democratic innovations. But first, let's have a look at how our democracy is doing in a large scale. If you think about the traditional measures, how we think about democracy and how we should be engaging with democracy, we typically think about voting activity because every few years we can cast a vote. That's our basic right and responsibility as a citizen. But so it happens that in the Western world, the voting turnouts are in decline. It's a trend that has been happening for several years. Also, there is a declining trust in political institutions, unfortunately, and also there is decreasing social cohesion all over the Western society. So it has been stated that we are actually in the middle of a democratic recession. That's a term that has been used by our colleague Larry Diamond at Stanford University. So at the same time, we are also experiencing this era of democratic innovations, which Ken was referring to, that we are innovating the practices, how people can participate in democratic processes. And oftentimes, these processes can happen online, and today we are focusing on online and digital tools. And democratic innovations, they basically mean innovations and practices that bring citizens closer to the decision-making and preparation process of policies. We're going to have a look at some examples soon. And democratic innovations, they enhance the aspects of participatory and deliberative democracy. If you think about these concepts first separately before combining them together, if you think about the notion of participatory democracy, then we are inviting people to participate in various ways in democratic practices. And the aspect of deliberation, instead, it focuses on interaction between people, basically the reasoned exchange of arguments and opinions between people. And democratic innovations, they typically try to enhance the participation in these processes and thus also increase inclusiveness and then also increase transparency in democratic practices so that we as citizens, we would know better what's actually going on with the policymaking process and we wouldn't be just voting every few years. But now, of course, our statement here as a team is not that we don't think that democratic innovations are a panacea that will somehow save us with one click. That would be really easy. We would love to do that, right? But unfortunately, life is not that simple. But we do think that we have to explore the path of democratic innovations and find out how they can work in practice. Because only with these experiments and explorations that we are doing here, we can find out what can work. So with this, let's zoom in into one example from Finland, where I'm from originally. So there I work with the government of Finland and the Committee for the Future in the Finnish Parliament, and we are experimenting with democratic innovations there. And one of the experiments that we did last year was that we invited citizens to participate in a law reform process online. And basically we asked them to submit their ideas, how a certain type of a law, that was an off-road traffic law, how that law should be reformed. And one of the most active participants was this man from northern part of Finland, like just by the Arctic Circle, which is like the Alaska of the United States. And he participated from a very remote area using his tablet device. And then these ideas, like also his ideas that he submitted online, they raised a lot of discussion and deliberation between the participants. So if you think about the bigger picture, what actually happens to a policymaking process when we invite the so-called crowd, the crowd that participates online to these processes. So we see here that we have the bill proposal process on the right, and we have the traditional expert groups and interest groups that influence the bill proposal, the preparatory process, meaning that there's information exchange and influence exchange. And now when we invite people, just like we did in the Finnish experiment, we invite people to participate in the preparation of the policy. They contribute with their ideas and knowledge. And then the bill will still go back, it will go to the actual decision-making process, which happens by the elected representatives. So the crowd here, the online participants, they don't take the role of decision makers, but they take the role of knowledge contributors. And then if we come back to North America and we think about the notion of participatory budgeting, how many of you have heard about participatory budgeting actually? Like 1/3. Yeah, that's pretty well, because just this year, $27 million will be used in North America, in Canada, and in the United States in participatory budgeting. And how it works is that in local level, in city, politicians who lead certain districts, they decide to set aside certain amount of the budget so that the residents of that area can decide how that budget will be used, like for instance $1 million. And then first the residents, they propose projects, how that money will be used, and then the residents also vote about the project. So the winning project will be then implemented. And because we are here in California, let's zoom back into our state. So just this year, San Francisco is doing participatory budgeting again, so in 3 districts. So if you live in the city, check out if your district is participating in participatory budgeting, because you can actually have a say in your local neighborhood and maybe build a new park or resurface a street. And also the city of Vallejo is doing participatory budgeting. And then if you're interested in knowing more about collective intelligence and the role of collective intelligence in democratic theory, so we totally encourage you to check out this wonderful book by Ellen Landemore. She's an assistant professor of political science at Yale, and she writes about democratic theory and collective intelligence. So with this, I want to conclude my sequence and invite John to continue. Thanks.
And so in our research here, we found many examples and experiments of this type of work, as Ken alluded to earlier. And each of these examples, and the reason we've selected this group here, is they experiment in lots of different ways. They have different intended outcomes and different kind of modes of engagement. And so here you can see a kind of potpourri of possibilities. So if we zoom into just a few of them, you have something like UCUT, which is very one-touch engagement, rapid, ongoing polling. In this particular case, it's used for predicting issues for cuts in budgets. You have also another example, Consider It. Here you can gain insights from a crowd, so you can draw people's opinions, put them together on a spectrum, form a position, and locate yourself in relation to other people. And then finally below, we have the Madison Project. Here, you can have participants collaborate on legislation. So it takes a really kind of high literacy skill here to participate in this project, but you can debate key points in the drafting of legislation. And so I'm going to turn it over here to Matti, who's going to put this in relation to CRC.
So yeah, as we've been highlighting, there's plenty of stuff ongoing in area of democratic innovations. And the question is that how would we say that California report card differs from the existing efforts? And of course, the first dimension is the level of participation ideation. So let's take, there's the California budget challenge. Actually, you are not given any opportunity to ideate. You can vote on preset settings of what can happen, what cannot happen. Whereas in California report card or Consider It, you actually have a possibility to engage in the dialogue and go deeper into ideation, propose new things, stuff like that. Then one thing, it's really low, but there's the level of peer interaction, so it might be high or low. So let's say that we have cyclic fix, where we actually are looking nice ideas. We are looking for issues to fix in the local area. But it's not that interactive. You are not actually engaged in the interaction with some other social being other than the government, if we consider government as a social being. But it's like a report and then something hopefully happens. Whereas in California report card or let's say Mike Gatter, so the collaborative bill creation, you actually are engaged with other citizens. So we've been highlighting quite a lot on that democratic innovations are a big thing. So they are happening in Finland, they are happening in the UK, they are happening in the US. And the question is that how do we know if it's a good one, if it's a working innovation or not? So this is one framework proposed by Dr. Smith. So the idea is that for a democratic innovation to work, you should have inclusiveness, popular considered judgment or thoughtfulness, transparency, efficiency, and transferability. And let's just check some of these with the Californian report card. So for example, in inclusiveness, because of the mobile front end, we say that we are actually taking a big effort in that direction. Of course, there's multicultural issues that yet are to be solved, but we are working on that direction, hopefully for the next report card. But we are taking direction. It's not just those people who have desktop. It's actually a bit huge difference on that area. Popular control, basically the idea is that do the people impact what's happening there? And actually this stage has been just about popular control. We've been asking ideas about new topics for citizens report card, and in the data stage you'll actually see a bit more on that. Thoughtfulness, that's again, we'll demonstrate that in the data side, but we didn't remove ideas. They were really good. So there's only, was it 3 or 4, something like that. Data guys will cover that, but they were actually quite good ideas, quite thoughtful ideas. Transparency refers to if the people participating know what's happening out there. We have data output. We actually open all the data, so it's yet or soon in the website. Then there's efficiency and transferability, which are more of this kind of if the tool actually is smart to use. So let's actually first focus on transferability. So the idea is that, okay, we might have a nice democratic innovation, like Iceland had their own wiki page, let's create a new constitution, but can we transfer that kind of innovation to US? It might be that it doesn't work right that direction. And we are in discussion to demonstrate that this kind of report card can be transferred to other cultures, other domains. So we'll see that later on. That's something that's in future work. And last part, efficiency. So the time used by certain citizens, is it too much, too little, that kind of stuff. We'll need still to go a bit deeper on that. But maybe now we'll have Sanja and the data.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that we found, and I think Maddie did a good introduction to this with the transparency and talking about some of those issues that we can see from the data. So far the California report card has been going really strong. We've gotten a ton of excitement around the application. We've had nearly 7,000 visitors, and I was told today morning we actually crossed the 7,000 mark, so that's great. And visitors have come from 53 out of the 58 counties, and this was kind of a much broader reach than we had anticipated to start off with, and we want to get those last 5 counties. So that's something, if you know someone in one of those grayed out spots, you can help us out with. I think that the California report card is interesting from multiple perspectives, but to me it was particularly interesting as a data science challenge that we had 3 different types of data that we're getting from this report card. We have assessment data, where participants are leaving grades on 6 initial issues. Then we have ideation, where participants are suggesting new issues for the future report card. And then we have deliberation, where we're actually getting more quantitative data to synthesize the suggestions we've gotten in the ideation section. And so really our insights are coming from correlating all of these different types of data together and looking at them jointly. So I'm first going to go into the assessment section. And since we don't have a demo, I'll go into a little bit detail of exactly what questions we asked and how that panned out. So we asked 6 questions, and they were graded on a scale from F to A+. And we allowed all the intermediate grades, like pluses and minuses. And you can see that we chose these 6 issues to be particularly timely. They're relevant to current events. They were also relevant to a large group of Californians. So like there's no kind of exclusive, like so someone doesn't have exclusive knowledge of any of these questions. And also we tried to trade off collecting a large amount of data and then not burdening the user with too many questions. So these are the 6 questions that we asked. And we asked the question, how would you grade California on these 6 issues? The data that we got is actually rather interesting. So these are histograms showing the grades that the participants left. And overall, about 2,000 participants out of the 7,000 visitors left at least 1 grade. And we see something really interesting. And it kind of matches our intuition on 2 questions. If you look at the question about Obamacare, the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, and the question about marriage rights, we see that we see that in general the Californians thought positively about these issues. And furthermore, we mark the median grades in red, and that's a point at which 50% graded higher and 50% graded lower. On the other 4 questions, it's a little bit of more of a mixed bag. And I just want to point out one example, that the question about affordability of colleges, we actually see that our median grade is around a C, but the most frequent grade is actually a D, which is kind of interesting to us, but that is a little bit encouraging. It does show that we can come up with insights by looking at these distributions, looking at what we're getting, and maybe we need a little bit more work to do over there. So there's some, we have also discussed that grading is a little bit subjective, just inherently, that there's some ambiguity in the way that these questions are asked. For example, if grading positively on marriage rights, does that mean you support the current position? If you disagree with that position, would you grade an F, or would you just leave it blank? So there are some issues over there, and I'd be happy to discuss in more detail some of our discussions about that at the end. So another kind of key innovation, and this is something that we thought about a lot. And we went back and forth on it, but we allowed participants to skip issues. And we thought that this was a method to allow participants to improve their quality of response. So if they did not know about an answer, they could choose to skip the question. And we found that, I think it's cut off a little bit, but the question that is skipped the most is immigration. And the exact question was, how would you grade California on services for undocumented immigrants? And maybe perhaps many Californians did not have direct experience with this with the state government on this issue, and we found that it was most skipped. So another big part of our project was linking this to geographic data. We at the end of the grading phase, at the end of the assessment phase, participants submitted a zip code. And we went back and forth about how much demographic information we should ask from our participants. And it turned out the zip code actually gave us a lot, and it was relatively low barrier to entry. Participants were not burdened with a long demographic survey. They just had to give one number. And we could join this data set with the census data set, the wealth of knowledge and county data sets, and population information, and so on and so forth. As a teaser of what we were able to do with that geographic information, we can actually look at the median grade for each county. And I just want to show that matching our intuition based on the histograms, the question about marriage rights is almost universally in California somewhere between a C plus and an A in terms of the grade. And for the other issues, it's a little bit more regional. We see that for the immigration issue, that in the urban Central Valley, like Fresno, Bakersfield, that area, we see a statistically significant increase in grades on this issue. Perhaps it's due to more awareness about the services the state provides for undocumented immigrants. And this is particularly significant because when we look at the grades for all the other issues, the Bay Area tended to grade the state more positively than other regions. So now I'm going to go into the ideation section. I'm going to talk about the textual suggestions that we collected. And as Maddie alluded to, really that we were really surprised about the quality of our suggestions. We got about 330 ideas. And yes, this is a small number compared to the large number of visitors that we had, but this is kind of what has been our experience in these web systems, that it's really hard to encourage like the power users to contribute to the system. And at the end, we actually designed a tool for the crowd to basically flag particularly egregious comments, things that were off topics, because we were all really scared about all the horror stories we've heard about online tools like flame wars and malicious activities. But it turned out only we had to remove three off-topic ideas, and this was 3 out of 338, which was actually really interesting to us. That, well, I mean, people were excited and they left good quality comments. So how did we analyze this? We tagged the ideas with kind of general topics. We went through this and we wanted to see how they worked on kind of a coarser level. And the question that we had asked was, what issues should be included in the next report card, and why is it important to Californians? And you can kind of see what people gave. We pruned out some of the ideas that were too similar to our original 6 questions in this analysis, just so we're focusing it a little bit more on the future and saying that what did we come up with new? But here's the kind of breakdown. It turns out that the first few topics, especially around the environment and upon the economy and about disaster preparedness, accounted for like 60-70% of the ideas, but there were some interesting ones about human trafficking, social services, and childcare that I think they were particularly insightful because they were unique. So finally, let's go into the deliberation section, and this is like synthesizing the textual data that we got and bubbling up the best the best ideas. So just kind of a screenshot of our interface. I wish we had gone through a demo on this, but I just wanted to briefly put this up there. This is how our interface looked like. People, when they clicked on the metaphorical cafe table, they clicked on a mug on the table, they would pull up a question, they would pull up a suggestion for a future issue like that. And they would grade it on two axes. How important is this issue for the next report card? And how would you grade the state on this issue today? And from on the same slider that I presented before. So we focus in this analysis on the first question. How important is this issue for the next report card? And really what we were interested in is, are there common groups of topics that are of interest? What do our participants value? Is there some like structure to this data that we're seeing? Like, is there a particular topic that resonates with our participants? And as Ken pointed out in the first, in the introductory talk, we come from a background in robotics and statistics, and so we really wanted to think about this in terms of high-dimensional data. That there's this kind of high-dimensional correlation structure. So if I grade that, if I think that transportation is an important issue, maybe I also think the budget is an important issue due to the way the high-speed rail affects the budget. So these are the kinds of questions that we were interested in, and our idea was to use this technique called principal component analysis. And basically, we can take a very complicated correlation structure. You can think of all the issues paired up with all the other issues and distill them down to their principal components. When we do that, we get a plot something like this. And we get like 2 dimensions, and we get these we get the topics for the suggested issues kind of spread out in this thing. We immediately see that there are 4 well-defined clusters, and we kind of give some semantic meaning to them. We call there's an urban cluster, there's a cluster about kind of fiscal issues, there's a cluster about disaster issues and the environment, and privacy is off on its own thing. And privacy was kind of a catch-all for open data and internet issues as well. But what can we do with this analysis? When we broke it down into this, we started tying this back and correlating it with our original data. We correlated it with our geography. We correlated it with importance answers. And we found that, interestingly enough, like for a question like the urban issues, we see that there's a lot of regional bias. That in the urban areas, people found this cluster of issues particularly important, but not so much in the rural areas. But for the disaster preparedness issue and the environment issue, we found that almost universally over the state, people thought this was important. And this is really interesting to us because this kind of keyed us into this issue as being something looking forward is kind of an important thing to focus on. So we also looked at fine-grained analysis. Because in the previous slide I talked about how we grouped suggestions together, we also looked at individual suggestions, which was considered the most important. And we used a metric that incorporates not only the average grade, but also how much participants disagree on their grades to that comment, the variance, and also the number of ratings that it received. And we have a cool little sampling algorithm that makes sure that we try to even out the ratings received by all the different suggestions. So this is in the statistics literature called the Wilson score, and I encourage you guys to read more about it because this is used in many different web platforms today. So what did our score actually pull up? So these were the top 4 ideas. I think I pruned 1 or 2 of them for redundancy, but you can kind of see what we pulled up. And I think that Brandy will talk more about this and introduce some of the participants afterwards. But I think that we definitely see that this environment and climate change and disaster preparedness are really an important issue. And you can kind of see how the clustering happened because you can kind of see the interplay between climate change and disaster preparedness and these kind of things. So I want to conclude this talk with a discussion about the potential biases in the system. The results that we presented when I said statistical significance, when I said trends, are what in the statistical lingo are called internally valid. That means given our population and given our methodology, this is what is these are significant in our context. But I think it's one of our future research directions to figure out how to make this externally valid. And it's really an open question. And 2 particular biases that we were interested in are biases introduced by the system. That means that in the CRC, does the instant feedback, for example, revealing the median grade after a person leaves a grade, is this introduce a bias? Or is skipping introduce a bias? And we were also interested in inherent biases in the population structure. And really, I want to give a teaser on what kind of analysis we've been doing and how we've been trying to address this question. So on a really high level, we have, you can see that we do have a little bit of a population bias. If we look at a regional map per capita, we see that we have a lot of participants in the Bay Area due to we launched here, but we have a little bit of work to do in Southern California. But this is not all that bad because it's a little bit encouraging to me because when we saw this map first and we saw that we were misrepresented in the rural areas, Brandy conducted a huge outreach effort calling up public libraries and encouraging rural participants to participate. And we were actually able to even that gap by today. And we see that like our fraction of participants is actually roughly what you would expect urban-rural, the breakdown that you would see in California. So if we can have a similar push in Southern California, we might be able to even out some of this representativeness. We also conducted a survey with the same questions with SurveyMonkey. And this survey was randomized. It went to a focus panel of 611 people and sampled from kind of a broader focus group to get that 611 people. And we found that, interestingly enough, our results were not that far off from what we reported, which is really interesting to us that we found that while there were statistically significant results, some of these observed differences were smaller than the precision on our sliders. Like they corresponded to like half of a plus grade. So which is really interesting, and this does deserve more work. This does not conclusively say that we don't have any biases, but I think it's encouraging that at least our interface is not adding any additional biases into the system. So we've done a whole bunch of other mathematical research on this subject, and I'd encourage you guys to ask questions afterwards. So.
I'm Brandy Nonke. I'm the postdoc with the CITRIS Data and Democracy Initiative and the project manager on the California Report Card. And to me, definitely one of the greatest aspects of working on this project was not only learning from my incredibly intelligent colleagues, but also learning from the people of California. And as project manager, I had the opportunity to go through every suggestion posted to the California Report Card. And from that experience, I learned that Californians are extremely passionate about seeing California and everyone else in it prosper. And that made me feel really good about now being a new Californian. I'm from Iowa. Yeah. And Sanjay, we identified the top 20 suggestions, and I was able to contact those individuals, and 5 of them are here with us today. And I'd like to introduce them and ask them to come up and say a few words about their experience using the platform. We have Jeff Stiles from Excella. Holly Joseph is a tech recruiter in the Bay Area. Lisa Ho works in the Chief Information Office at UC Berkeley. A lot of office information ones. Elizabeth Kelly, she's an architecture student at UC Berkeley, and Michelle Moskowitz, and she has a very long title. I can't remember. I had my cheat sheet over there. But if you would all come up and say one word, or I'll give you my microphone. All right, to do it justice, Michelle Moskowitz, Director of Government Affairs, Advocacy, and Institutional Relations. Told you it was long.
Well, I definitely can't match that in terms of title. You know, it's sort of a delicious irony for me to be up here talking about my experience in working with the report card. I work for a company that's basically bet its future on civic engagement, and I believe fundamentally that, you know, after reading Citizenville and learning a lot about, you know, what's happening in this world, that the essential ingredient is engagement. The topic that I submitted from a personal point of view, but I have a professional interest in it as well. I think open data is a foundation for us to have a conversation. It's the basis for transparency and creating trust in governing. But I also believe it's a foundation for unlocking a lot of value in related industries. So a lot to talk about there, but the experience in working with the report card was phenomenal, both in terms of being able to provide my feedback on how California is doing, but also as a citizen and a concerned individual to be able to participate myself.
Thank you. Lisa.
Hi. So my mom was a card-carrying peace and social justice activist, and so once she had retired and gotten the kids out of the house, she devoted her time, and her job was to make sure the government and everyone around her knew what she felt about peace and social justice issues. So she was writing letters, and she was protesting on the streets, and she was doing sit-ins and die-ins and taking over buildings and everything that you can imagine. And as much as I honor and respect and admire her for that, I'm not doing that. I'm still taking care of my kids, and I'm still working every day. And so you probably hear from me once a year at the polls when I'm going and doing my vote. And when we're in this era of where we have the technology for constant connectedness and where the government and business know more about me and what I do and what I'm saying than I would ever want to reveal, there's a gap that we really should be putting our technology toward, and California Report Card is a great place to do that. And I really admire Lieutenant Governor Newsom for being interested in doing this, because if my kids were being graded by a teacher who wasn't paying attention all the time, and lots of different teachers who have completely different reasons for why they would give an F on this, is it because they think that we should be doing more fracking so that we can have energy independence, or less fracking so that we can protect the environment, and all of those are turning into one mishmash of grades? How can you resolve that and act on that? I respect you for taking this step and really trying to listen and have a two-way conversation with the public.
Thank you. Holly?
Hi, I'm Holly Joseph, and my question was about water conservation, which for me is very, very important. We don't have meters in the Central Valley, which we can conserve our water, but what's going on in the valley, we can't even measure it, so we don't know. So for me, measuring is knowing, and that was my big concern. I'm an infrastructure person. I'm a fifth generation Californian, so for me it's super important that we solve this problem so we don't have a fighting water war state. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you have.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kelly, and my suggestion was about earthquake preparedness, and my experience with the California Report Card really made me feel as if everyone who is living and participating in the state can have their opinion heard, and knowing that other people cared about this issue made me feel like it's really doing a difference. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Moskowitz, and I work on campus, and I learn a lot about a lot of policy issues representing this campus. And I came up with this question because I go to lots of forums and informational meetings with legislators and researchers about how we're addressing California's sea level rise and earthquakes and wildfires, and there's lots of new technologies to address these problems, but the question is, who's paying for it? And I really enjoyed this opportunity the California Report Card offered for participatory input and democracy. It was really fun. I thought the technology was great. It was really easy to use, and I enjoyed it, and it worked really well. So I commend you guys for doing it. It was a lot of fun, and it's something that me and my colleagues in my office can promote and hopefully expand it broadly. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming out. One of the things we experimented with was an incentive structure. So there was a scoring. So people get scores based on how often they participate, how many grades they assign to others, and how their ideas are graded by other people. And so all those scores are online. So I tell you that as an incentive to go in to the California Report Card yourself if you haven't already. You can rack up a score. There'll be other incentives offered in the future. How many of you, by the way, have tried the California Report Card? Okay, good. So almost everyone has experienced it. So with that, I want to again say it has been an enormous pleasure working with the team of individuals that you see up here. They are just an all-star team. I've been teaching for 20 years, and they're really among the very best group of students and colleagues I've ever worked with.